Okay, it's July 2nd, and we are talking this week about mixed methods and action research. And I wanted to do a little housekeeping though first. So, one thing is that you might have read about the research activity. And this is an activity where you do some research of your own. And just because of the constraints of the summer, we unfortunately cannot do that in this class. And so the research activity is not something that you actually have to complete. You'll see an item for it in the grade book, and I'll just not put a grade in there and it'll be dropped. So that's one thing to be aware of. And it is Independence Day this week, so I declare your independence from the research activity. You don't have to do it. Um, all right. Also, exam 2 is completed, and so most of you did very well on the exam. And I think exam 3 is going to be somewhat comprehensive, but mostly on the chapters that you have read. So there'll be chapter questions as before in exam 3. This will be the final exam during like the last week of class. But you'll also have some questions about previous overarching concepts for the class in that exam as well. All right, let's talk about mixed methods and action research for this week. So action research, let me go back actually. We'll start with mixed methods research. Here we go. All right, mixed methods research is quantitative and qualitative data collection within the same study. And so these are the two different types of research you'll be learning about, mixed methods and action research. So mixed methods includes quantitative and qualitative data collection within the same study. But there are a lot of challenges with this, as you can imagine, because again, you're collecting more information than you would otherwise. You're only on another study, you might just collect quantitative information or just qualitative information or data. So that's a challenge, is that it includes at least 2 research procedures, because you have to go through and collect the data and also analyze it for both types of data. And any research method that you choose to use, you must understand it thoroughly. So for instance, let's say you're using some survey data, survey research data. You have to understand the ins and outs of survey research, but you also add to that maybe a case study research method along with that survey data, or maybe a research method where you have interviews and so forth. So you have to also understand the qualitative elements of that as well for interviewing. And selecting a mixed method design assumes that you can't answer the research question by either a qualitative or quantitative approach alone. And so you use it sparingly, basically, this mixed methods approach. You only use it when you can't answer a question by one or the other. So because of these challenges, and because this is your first chance for most of you to engage in the research process or be thinking about the research process in a serious way, I only require you, I kind of discourage you from using mixed methods, and instead just require you to choose either qualitative or quantitative approaches for your research, just because it's, again, you have to get pretty in depth with whatever research method you choose for this class. And having to do that twice doubles your amount of work. So you'll notice that there are different notations as you read in the chapter. There's quan versus quan, the all caps versus lowercase, meaning that one is more, I guess, a larger part of the research study than the other. And there are a bunch of basic research designs that you'll read about, such as explanatory sequential, which starts with quantitative data collection and then finishes with qualitative. Exploratory sequential, which is the opposite. And convergent parallel, where they're collected equally and about at the same time. And you have a whole bunch. That one's a repeat. But that's just mixed methods research in a nutshell. As you read, hopefully this will give you kind of a nice organizing way to think about this type of research. Next is action research. And action research is a systematic inquiry into one's own environment for improving outcomes. So that's an interesting way to put that, but basically the idea is that you do research within your own environment, within something that you care about or invested in or are working in each day. And action research in education, it would be a systematic inquiry conducted by teachers, principals, school counselors, or other stakeholders about the teaching and learning environment, about the ways in which particular schools operate, the teachers teach, and the students learn. A classic example of action research would be a teacher who has a classroom of, let's say, 5th graders, and wants to try out something new with the fifth graders. So then the teacher does try that thing out and then collects some data on that and finds that yes, indeed, the thing that she tried was a good thing, that it did affect student achievement in a positive way, and therefore she should continue to use that thing that she tried out. That's the idea with action research. It's within your own environment, the environment where you already work or where you already might have some stake. So that's action research, and the purpose of this type of research is to affect positive change within a specific environment. In other words, it's making your class better by trying some of these things out, hopefully. And it's even making your class better if, let's say, it didn't work out as well as you'd hoped. Like, let's say you tried to do something and student achievement didn't increase as much as it normally would. Well, at least it's still improving things by saying, well, at least I know I don't have to do that anymore, and that maybe that method doesn't work. And so you're still improving things over time. So the point is to improve student outcomes for education and improve lives, solve everyday problems rather than just pie in the sky or upper problems that academics want to solve, but it's an everyday problem type of research. And reflection, looking critically at one's own practice, is a part of it, and it encourages change and risks. And it can be persuasive and authoritative simply because it is done by a practitioner in their field. Another example of this might be a counselor trying out a new counseling technique, or it could be someone in sports performance trying out a new training technique and testing whether that helps their athlete's performance or not. Again, it's action research, it's within the area of your research, but it usually is a smaller number of people than maybe, let's say, a quantitative study where you're trying to get a large swath of population. It's relevant, it's accessible, meaning that people can read it and understand it, unlike some academic articles that maybe you have tried to read. And it's sometimes difficult to generalize because, again, it's done within a specific setting that may not be generalizable to other settings. So that's a little nutshell of action research in a nutshell. And those are the two methods of research that you'll be learning about today. I think these resonate with a lot of people, though. These two different methods really resonate with a lot of people when I teach these in class because, mixed methods research is a nice way to kind of get an idea of both the quantitative and qualitative elements of a study. For instance, I ran a survey a few years ago and found out some information from teachers about what technologies they have in their classroom, but I also did some interviews of some of those teachers to ask them more about that subject and why, how they felt maybe about the technologies that were available in their class. So the survey gave me data about, I have this many, or this is the average amount of computers in this classroom, and I was looking at smaller versus larger school districts. Found that smaller school districts tended to have more devices available for students than larger school districts. And I think it's just a matter of the fact that smaller school districts have fewer students, and so they can buy fewer devices to make sure each student has one. But I did the interviews and talked to larger school district teachers about, what their feelings were about this, and they kind of get the feeling that, yeah, it's the smaller districts that are doing these innovative things where they have a device for every student. And it was interesting. Again, it added this interesting element to the research study to talk about it from a mixed methods point of view and to have both this quantitative and qualitative research. On the action research side, a study that we did a few years ago, Dr. Moon and I, was to go into a fifth grade classroom and try a new technique out wherein students would have to basically respond to us and create something that showed what their reading was for the week. Each week they had a special reading that they had to do. And they knew at the end of the week we would come in and they would work with us to recreate that reading in some way, whether it was a concept map, a story that they could create on an iPad app, or on even make a movie of what they had read. And as they did these comprehension activities, or these activities where they had to share what they had read, within that one classroom, we found quite a bit of improvement among students. I think they improved as much as you would expect them to improve in a year within that just 8 or 9 week period. So That was a fun study as well, but it was within a classroom, and it was a teacher who wanted to improve reading outcomes among her students because she hadn't had as much luck with this group this time. So that's a good example of action research as well. Okay, so those are the different elements of research that you'll be learning about this week. This week you are going to go through, read chapters 15 and 16 on mixed methods and action research. And then you're going to talk about qualitative research design as well as or mixed methods or action research. You know, how have you thought differently about your research plan? How could one of these qualitative methods enhance your research study? It's okay if you've already picked a quantitative one. In fact, I think most of you have. But maybe talk about how a narrative or ethnographic or case study or mixed methods approach might improve your study if you were to take that instead, even though you don't have to take any of these. And in fact, I'm discouraging you from doing mixed methods. And then you'll submit your design participants procedures assignment. Now this assignment is an important one because you outline what you plan to do for your proposed research study. Now remember, you actually don't have to complete this research study that you propose. And so the sky's kind of the limit. You can make it a pretty big study. You can add in all kinds of things because you don't actually have to complete it. But you do want to make it realistic. So this is what you have. You're going to choose one of these methods. Make sure it's clear which method you've chosen. Either under quantitative, you've got survey research, correlational research, causal comparative research, experimental research, single subject experimental research. And then qualitative, you have narrative, ethnographic, or case study research. So you're going to pick one of those and develop a study that matches one of those. So, and if you choose quantitative research proposals, there's different instructions than if you choose qualitative research proposals. And you need to include these basic elements: the type of quantitative research, participants, instruments, design, procedure. Or if it's qualitative, choose the type of qualitative research, participants, data collection, and procedure. And with qualitative, you get to get into pretty big detail on data collection. It helps to go back to the chapter of whatever research method you've chosen and look again about what the process is. For instance, for qualitative research, you're going to have to talk about how you'll gain entry into the site and how will you negotiate your role will you be a participant observer or a non-participant observer, or will you be an interviewer? Describe those types of things in this study. Try to describe your study in as much detail as you can. Look down at the rubric items before you submit as well. And when you do submit this, I will go ahead and grade it. So don't submit something unless you're pretty sure it's done, because I'll go ahead and grade it when I have some in. All right, so make sure for the type of research, for the rubric anyway, the type of research for this proposal is clearly indicated. So again, tell which kind it is. Participants clearly indicated, including population from which sample is selected. So remember, we go back to the sampling chapter where we learned about population versus sample, and what are some, how many people are going to be in your sample, what's the important characteristics related to the study of these people. Describe the instruments. And for any instrument that you include, and that includes qualitative studies as well, you'll have instruments like an interview protocol and an observation protocol. Make sure you put a few sample items in there so that I can see what they are. So make sure that I understand, that there is what are some sample items from this instrument, and if it's an existing instrument, get some sample items from it and include those in there so that I have an idea of what those are. All right, the design of the research study is presented clearly and includes a clear figure or diagram. So for instance, if it's an experimental study, make sure you go ahead and put in the notation that shows, pre-test, then the treatment control group, then post-test, that kind of a thing. Make a diagram maybe of that. It does require some kind of diagram to show your research design or research process. And then also with any design that you choose, you need to talk about why it was selected, why it's appropriate for this study. What are some potential threats to validity associated with the design, and ways that the study may overcome these threats? So with any kind of method you're going to choose, whether it's survey, correlational, or so forth, you're going to have some drawbacks to that method. So talk about those. What are some of the things that are maybe not so strong with survey research, and how might your research study overcome some of these threats? This, by the way, this all goes into a narrative format, so you're going to talk about it in narrative format as the example that is listed below this shows. All right, procedure description includes a clear overall timeline of events as they should happen in the research study. So again, this is the procedure is, what is the first step for the study, what's the next step, and so forth until the end. And the manner in which the sample was selected and groups were formed, and how and when the pre-test and post-test data were collected, and ways in which groups are different, and aspects of the study that are similar for all groups. So if you have like an experimental research study, for instance, you could talk about, what is the control group and what is the treatment group and how are they different. If you're going to do a qualitative study, make sure you again look at this rubric and talk about why the design was selected, what are some threats to validity, and so forth. Again, you have many of the same types of items that you're going to be included, but they're a little bit different just because qualitative is a little bit different than quantitative. And as I mentioned before, the design participants procedures example is down below, and so you can see one from a previous student that scored fairly well, and take a look at that as an example.